I knew the moment she walked in the door. 20 years of marriage had taught me to read her like a book, and tonight, that book was titled Guilty as Sin. I could smell the cheap wine and cologne on her before she even spoke. I kept chewing my steak, rare enough that it was practically mooing, and pretended not to notice her standing there with her hands on her hips. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence between us. It was an old thing, a wedding gift from her parents, its face yellowed with age. In a way, it had become the heartbeat of our home, steady, reliable, unchanging. Unlike my wife. "Honey, we have to talk," Rebecca finally said, breaking the silence. I let her stand there fidgeting while I savored another bite. The steak was perfect. I'd grilled it myself while she was supposedly out with the girls. Another lie in a mountain of deception that had been building for months. I'd seasoned the meat with salt, pepper, and a dash of my own bitterness, cooking it just the way I liked it. Rebecca used to cook for me, back when she still pretended to care. When I finally acknowledged her presence, I kept my voice even. "Do we?" Rebecca slid into the chair next to me, her movements calculated, practiced. The overhead light caught the silver pendant I'd given her, my anniversary gift with its hidden purpose. She claimed she wasn't happy with our marriage, that we needed to expand our horizons. As she spoke, her hand found my thigh, then wandered upward with practiced familiarity. 20 years I'd spent at the mill. 20 years of overnight shifts, of breathing in metal dust and coming home with shoulders that ached to the bone. 20 years of overtime to put a roof over our heads, food on our table, and 2 kids through college. 20 years to give Rebecca the luxury of staying home to raise our children. And somehow, that wasn't enough. Now she wanted to open our marriage. The irony might have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. She was asking permission for something she'd already taken. When I mentioned our wedding vows, she dismissed them casually. "Oh, honey, it's just physical." Just physical, as if 2 decades of promises meant nothing. I met Rebecca during my second year working at the mill. I was 23 and she was 21. A college dropout working as a receptionist at the doctor's office where I went for a back injury. 5 stitches and 3 dates later, we were inseparable. She was beautiful back then, not in the polished, artificial way she cultivated now, but with a natural radiance that came from youth and genuine laughter. We married after a whirlwind 6-month romance. My parents thought it was too soon, but I was certain. Rebecca had a way of making me feel like the center of her universe, a sensation I'd never experienced before. Growing up as the middle child in a family of 5 boys, I'd always been lost in the shuffle. With Rebecca, I was finally seen. The first few years were a struggle financially, but we were happy. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with second-hand furniture and a shared car that broke down every other month. I worked double shifts while Rebecca finished her associate's degree. We dreamed of a house with a yard, children's laughter, and weekend barbecues. When Rebecca got pregnant with our son, James, I took on a 3rd shift. The exhaustion was constant, but coming home to her growing belly and excited plans for the nursery made it worthwhile. I still remember the night James was born. How Rebecca squeezed my hand so hard I thought my fingers would break. How she looked at me through tears of pain and joy and whispered, "We made this. We made him." Our daughter, Emily, followed 3 years later. By then, I'd been promoted to floor supervisor, which meant slightly better pay, but even more responsibility. Rebecca decided to stay home with the kids, a choice we both agreed was best for our family. I told myself the long hours away were a necessary sacrifice. I was building something for us, for our future. The years blurred together in a routine of work, brief family dinners, bedtime stories when I could make it home in time, and collapsing into bed too exhausted for anything beyond a quick kiss goodnight. Rebecca seemed content. She had her children, her house with the yard we'd dreamed of, her book club, and her church friends. At least, that's what I told myself. I remember the day I first suspected something was wrong. 6 months ago, Rebecca started having girls' nights out every Friday. After 20 years of barely leaving the house except for groceries and kids' events, this sudden social butterfly act seemed suspicious. Still, I wanted to trust her. We'd built a life together. Surely that meant something. The first clue came when I called her best friend Marie one night when Rebecca was supposedly with her. Marie's confusion was genuine. They hadn't had plans in weeks. I hung up before she could ask questions, my stomach in knots. I could have confronted Rebecca that night when she came home, her blouse buttoned wrong and her lipstick smudged. Instead, I watched. I waited. I documented. Call it pride or call it strategy, but I wasn't about to accuse without proof. Our anniversary was approaching, and I had something special in mind. Not the kind of gift a loving husband typically gives, but the kind a betrayed one needs to. I spent a month's overtime on a beautiful pendant necklace, custom-made with a tiny camera embedded in its center. Finding someone to create such a thing wasn't easy, but desperation makes for thorough research. A technician in a neighboring town who specialized in surveillance equipment took my cash without asking questions. When I presented it to her, she seemed genuinely touched, promising to wear it always. "It's perfect," she'd said, fastening it around her neck. "I'll never take it off." She kept that promise at least, even on her girls' nights out. The waiting was the hardest part. Each Friday, I'd watch her get ready. New dresses I didn't recognize, makeup heavier than she'd ever worn for me. The perfume that filled our bedroom with a scent that didn't belong to the woman I married. And then I'd wait, pretending to watch TV while imagining what she was doing, who she was with, how many times she'd looked into a stranger's eyes the way she used to look into mine. Week after week, I downloaded the footage while she slept off the alcohol. I'd wait until her breathing became slow and steady, then carefully remove the necklace she'd forgotten to take off, or perhaps had become so accustomed to wearing that it was now part of her. The small memory card hidden inside yielded its secrets to my laptop in the cold blue light of our home office, the same room where we'd once sat together planning family vacations and reviewing our children's report cards. Night after night, I watched my wife, the mother of my children, transform into someone I didn't recognize. The videos showed her laughing too loud at bad jokes from men half my age, disappearing into bathroom stalls, car back seats, and cheap motel rooms. I watched her shrug off her wedding ring and tuck it into her purse before walking into bars where no one knew she was Mrs. Daniel Morgan, mother of 2, Sunday school teacher, and my wife of 20 years. The first night I watched the footage, I vomited until there was nothing left but bile. I contemplated smashing my laptop, burning our house down, and disappearing into the night without a word. Instead, I saved the video to an external hard drive, cleared my browser history, and went back to bed where I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling. By the 5th video, I felt nothing but cold calculation. I started editing the footage, organizing it by date, by man, by location. I opened accounts on obscure websites under anonymous emails. I researched divorce laws in our state. I spoke to a lawyer without telling Rebecca, paid him in cash to keep our consultation off the books. By the 10th video, I had a plan. I would not be made a fool. I would not beg for explanations or forgiveness. I would not rage, scream, or break things in our home that I had worked so hard to build. I would simply wait for her to reveal herself, and then I would reveal what I knew. Meanwhile, I maintained our routine. I went to work, came home, and asked about her day, as if I didn't already know its darkest details. I kissed her goodnight and pretended not to notice when she turned away from me in bed. I called our children regularly, listened to their college adventures, and never once hinted that their mother was dismantling the foundation of their childhood home. I became an actor in the play of my own life, waiting for the final act. "You really think you can betray me like this?" I asked her now, pointing my steak knife between her eyes. Her hand froze mid-caress. The fear in her eyes told me she sensed something had changed, but she had no idea how much. In that moment, I saw her not as my wife of 20 years, but as a stranger who had invaded my home, taken my name, and betrayed every promise we'd ever made. I told her everything, about the necklace, about the videos, about how I'd edited the best parts and uploaded them to a private folder on a website. The color drained from her face with each word, her expression shifting from disbelief to horror to a strange, resignated calm. "You recorded me?" she whispered, her hand moving to the pendant. "All this time?" "Not all this time," I said, careful to keep my voice level. "Just since our anniversary. Just long enough to know that every Friday night for the past 6 months, you've been with other men while I worked overtime to pay for the life you claim to want." "It wasn't like that," she started, but I cut her off. "No? What was it like, Rebecca? Enlighten me. Tell me how being with strangers in bathroom stalls is somehow different than what I think it is." Tears began to fall down her cheeks, mascara creating dark rivers on her still beautiful face. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, not even disappointment anymore. Just emptiness. When I tossed the divorce papers across the table, she dissolved completely. The terms weren't fair. She would get bare minimum alimony, no claim to my pension, and a fraction of our assets. But the alternative was worse. Everyone we knew, our children, our friends, her parents, her church group, would receive links to her videos. "You wouldn't," she whispered. But we both knew I would. "Why?" she asked after a long silence. "Why did you wait so long if you knew? Why not confront me the first time?" I considered the question. Why had I waited? Was it to gather evidence, to ensure my revenge would be complete? Or was there a part of me that kept hoping I was wrong, that there would be some innocent explanation, that my wife of 20 years hadn't thrown away everything we'd built for meaningless encounters with strangers? "I needed to be sure," I said finally, "and I needed you to show me who you really are." She looked at me with something like pity. "You don't know me at all." "I know enough." And I did. I knew the curve of her spine, the sound of her laughter, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. I knew how she looked when she held our newborn children, how she cried at sappy movies, how she always burned toast no matter how carefully she watched it. I knew the woman she had been and the stranger she had become. I knew everything except why. But in the end, did the why even matter? The divorce proceedings were mercifully brief. Rebecca signed everything without contest, avoiding eye contact with both me and her lawyer. Her pride was gone, replaced by a survival instinct that told her to cut her losses and run. James and Emily came home for what I told them was a family emergency. Sitting them down in our living room, the same room where we'd opened Christmas presents, celebrated birthdays, and built pillow forts when they were small, was the hardest thing I'd ever done. "Your mother and I are getting divorced," I said simply. "It's already in process." Their shock was expected. Their questions were harder to navigate. Why? What happened? Can't you work it out? Did you try counseling? I had decided beforehand not to tell them about their mother's infidelity. Not out of any desire to protect Rebecca, but to protect them. They deserved to keep their childhood memories intact, to remember their mother as the woman who bandaged scraped knees and baked birthday cakes, not as the woman in those videos. "Sometimes people grow apart," I told them. "Sometimes what you want at 23 isn't what you want at 50. Emily, always the more perceptive of our children, studied my face. "There's more to it, isn't there?" I met her gaze steadily. "There always is." Rebecca moved out the next day, taking only her clothes and personal items. She didn't fight for the photo albums, the furniture, or even her grandmother's china. She simply packed what she could fit in her car and left while I was at work, leaving her key on the kitchen counter next to a note that said only, "I'm sorry." 2 words for 20 years. It seemed inadequate. I heard through mutual friends that she's waitressing now at the same bar where she used to meet her companions. Sometimes I drive by just to see her through the window, carrying trays to the same men who used to carry her to their cars. There's a certain poetry to it. Our divorce was finalized exactly 7 months after I gave her the necklace. I received the paperwork in the mail, signed by a judge who knew nothing about us beyond the legal jargon that dissolved 2 decades of promises. I put the papers in a drawer and went for a long walk, trying to feel something, closure, relief, triumph, but found only a hollow space where my marriage used to be. That night, I deleted all the videos. Not out of forgiveness, but because I no longer needed them. The threat had served its purpose, and keeping them felt like allowing Rebecca to continue taking up space in my life. I kept only the external hard drive, locked in a safe deposit box at the bank, insurance against any future attempts to contest the divorce. As for me, I sold our house. Too many memories in those walls, and moved to a smaller place closer to the lake. I retired early from the mill, my settlement and savings enough to live modestly but comfortably. For the first time in decades, I sleep through the night without waking up to check the clock for my next shift. The first few months of freedom felt strange. No one to cook for, no one to ask about my day, no one whose breathing I could listen to in the darkness. I filled my time with projects I'd always been too busy for, refinishing furniture, fishing, reading books that had gathered dust on my shelves. I called James and Emily more often, making sure they knew the divorce hadn't changed my love for them. I reconnected with old friends who'd fallen by the wayside during my marriage. Mike from high school invited me fishing. Tony from the mill asked me to join his bowling league. Slowly, I rebuilt a life that was mine alone, no longer defined by being a husband or provider. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I met Caroline at a community college cooking class I'd joined to fill my newfound free time. She was the instructor, patient, kind, and 15 years my junior, though the age gap barely registered past our shared interests and easy conversation. Caroline didn't flirt or make obvious advances. Instead, she simply noticed me, my questions, my attempts at chopping onions without crying, my pride when I finally mastered a béarnaise sauce. After class, we'd sometimes talk about food, then books, then life. She'd been married once, too, briefly in her 20s to a man who decided marriage wasn't for him 3 years in. No children, no drama, just a lesson learned. Caroline knew about my divorce. Small towns have few secrets, but I spared her the sordid details. Some pain doesn't need to be shared to be honored. Instead, we built something new from scratch, like the recipes she taught me to perfect. Our first date wasn't planned as such. We both stayed after class to clean up, and somehow ended up sharing a bottle of wine at her small kitchen table, talking until midnight. She didn't ask why my marriage ended, and I didn't volunteer the information. Instead, we discovered mutual passions for hiking, old films, and terrible puns. 3 months into whatever we were, friends maybe, or something cautiously approaching more, Caroline invited me to her cabin for a weekend. It was a simple place, just 1 bedroom and a large open-plan living area that looked out over the lake. I brought food to cook, she provided wine, and we spent 2 days talking, laughing, and carefully circling the possibility of us. On Saturday night, we sat on her dock watching the sunset paint the water gold. The silence between us was comfortable, nothing like the loaded silences that had filled my marriage toward the end. Her hand found mine, a simple touch that felt more intimate than anything I'd experienced in years. "I like this," she said softly, "being here with you." I squeezed her hand, watching a heron take flight across the water. "I like it too." That night when she kissed me, it felt like being given something I hadn't realized I was allowed to want. I was 53 years old, starting over in a way I'd never imagined. She was 38, patient with my hesitations and gentle with my scars. In the morning, I made her breakfast, eggs and bacon and the French toast she'd taught me to perfect in class. We ate on her porch, watching the mist rise off the lake. "What are we doing?" I asked finally, the question that had been circling my mind. She considered this, sipping her coffee. "Living, I think. Finally living." Yesterday, as we sat on my dock watching the sunset, Caroline turned to me with serious eyes. "Honey, we have to talk," she said. My heart skipped a beat, old wounds threatening to reopen. Those 5 words, the same words Rebecca had used to begin the final chapter of our marriage. I braced myself for what would come next. But then Caroline smiled and took my hand. "I just want to tell you how much I love you and how much you mean to me." I exhaled slowly, letting go of a fear I hadn't realized I was still carrying. "Now that," I said, squeezing her hand, "is a conversation worth having. Sometimes revenge isn't just about making someone pay for their mistakes. Sometimes it's about creating the space for something better to grow in the ashes of what was destroyed. My only regret is that it took me so long to realize what I deserved all along. I still have the necklace, not the pendant with its hidden camera, which I destroyed after downloading the final videos, but the chain itself. It sits in a box at the back of my closet, a reminder not of Rebecca's betrayal, but of my own resilience. A reminder that sometimes you have to break apart what you thought would last forever to find what actually will. Last week, I saw Rebecca at the grocery store. She was thinner, her hair shorter, her face showing the strain of the past year. We made eye contact across the produce section, and for a moment, I thought she might approach me. Instead, she nodded once, a gesture somewhere between acknowledgement and apology, before turning her cart down another aisle. I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected. No righteous vindication, no lingering anger, just a strange, quiet certainty that we had both ended up exactly where we were supposed to be. That evening, I told Caroline about the encounter as we cooked dinner together in my kitchen, the same kitchen where my marriage had finally crumbled. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "How things ended?" I considered the question while stirring the pasta sauce she'd taught me to make from scratch. "I regret that it had to end that way," I said finally. "But I don't regret that it ended." Caroline nodded, understanding in her eyes. She didn't need to know the details to comprehend the shape of my pain, just as I didn't need to know every contour of hers. What mattered was that we'd both survived and somehow found each other in the aftermath. Later that night, as Caroline slept beside me, I thought about the strange path that had led me here. How betrayal had become liberation. How endings had become beginnings. How "we have to talk," once words that heralded destruction, had been transformed into an affirmation of love. Life has a way of coming full circle, not in neat, perfect loops, but in messy, complicated spirals that eventually lead you where you need to go. My revenge had given me justice, but Caroline had given me something far more valuable, a second chance to get it right. And this time, I wasn't taking anything for granted. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.